Welcome to Go Further Faster Turtle Breakdowns. In this video, we look at the other bottom position of Jiu-Jitsu, turtle position. Jiu-Jitsu is the grappling style that puts more emphasis on bottom game than any other. The vast majority of our training time and attention goes into the main bottom position of Jiu-Jitsu, that is, guard position. This is fair enough, since guard position offers much more offensive capability than any other bottom position, and does so without the risk of back exposure. Nonetheless, we must never ignore the other bottom position of Jiu-Jitsu, turtle position. Why? First, other grappling styles strongly emphasize turtle variations as they do not favor bottom position with back on the floor. Second, many opponents will turn to turtle position deliberately to prevent giving up guard passing points, so that turtle position often arises out of guard retention scrambles. Third, as we begin emphasizing standing technique and takedowns more and more, the occurrence of turtle position will rise as opponents will be reluctant to fall onto their back and concede takedown points. Now, let's compare the action of defeating the two bottom positions in Jiu-Jitsu, guard position and turtle position. In order to defeat guard position, you will have to clear your opponent's legs, and this will secure you 3 points. In order to defeat turtle position, you'll have to secure 2 hooks in, and this will score you 4 points. Passing a talented opponent's guard is one of the most difficult and physically demanding actions in all of Jiu-Jitsu. The amount of work you have to put in order to secure your 3 points is extraordinarily high at championship level. It usually results in a side position pin. Securing 2 hooks in on a turtled opponent is one of the least physically demanding actions in all of Jiu-Jitsu, and one of the less difficult skills in our sport to master. It results in the single most dominant position in all of Jiu-Jitsu, the rear mount, where you are ready to go into the most high percentage finishing moves in the sport, strangleholds from the back. It is very clear then that of the 2 bottom positions in Jiu-Jitsu, attacking the turtle position successfully is both physically easier and far more lucrative than guard passing. For these reasons, I put an extraordinary amount of emphasis on breaking down turtle position in order to get our 2 hooks in and get the highest score in the sport and go into the single best attacking position. Rear mount with 2 hooks in, getting the maximum possible score and the single best attacking position in the sport. It's an easier method of scoring than guard passing, and the end result is significantly better. So always understand there are 2 bottom positions in Jiu-Jitsu, and we should be very, very good at attacking both, and understand that the turtle position, though it gets less attention, is actually the more lucrative of the 2 to succeed in attacking. Now, let's begin our study of turtle position by understanding exactly what we're up against. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? Let's understand that there are variations of turtle position. And right from the start, we should understand exactly what those variations are and how that plays into our game of how ultimately we're going to defeat turtle position and start to score big points on people and get into good attacking positions. Let's make an immediate distinction between open turtle position and closed turtle position. So if we have an opponent here in a turtle situation, the first measure that we look at is my opponent in a closed or open turtle position? Let's define those very clearly. A closed turtle situation is one where my opponent's elbows go inside the knees, like so that the space around my opponent's body closes up, okay? The space that we're looking for, open up, is the space between the tricep and the quadricep, and the width of our opponent's base of support, which are going to be his elbows and his knees, okay? The wider the base of support, the more stable the turtle position becomes, okay? So that in a position like so, with a very wide base of support, you'll see there's tremendous stability. It's very hard for us to destabilize an open turtle position like so. However, because my opponent has opted for extreme width of base, it will now become very easy for us to step hooks in, to take a risk, etc., on a training partner, okay? So an open turtle position, which is characterized by width of base at the knees and elbows. Is extremely stable, but very open to insertion. Okay? This stands in contrast to a closed turtle position, where my opponent narrows his base of support and brings his elbows inside. This creates a situation where there's very little space for insertion. Very difficult for me to get hooks in, etc., etc. But this comes at the price of stability. My opponent can easily be pulled over the narrow base of support. Because he lacks a base of support, it's very easy to destabilize the turtle position in various directions. So this is the fundamental distinction that we have to make between an open position, which is very stable but easy to with regards to insertion, and a closed turtle position, which is very difficult to insert hooks on, but is very unstable. Within these two variations, there are sub-variations. For example, in the case of a closed turtle position, there is another form of turtle position where my opponent takes his hands off the floor and elbows off the mat. This is the so-called tripod turtle position, where my opponent's forehead comes down to the mat. Normally in a turtle position, you have 4 points of contact with the mat, 2 elbows and 2 knees, and that constitutes your base of support. In a tripod turtle position, we take our elbows off the mat and we use our forehead as a base of support. So there are only 3 points of contact with the mat, forehead and 2 knees. And in some cases, you will actually keep the head off the mat, and there's only really 2 points of contact with the mat, your 2 knees. The advantage of tripod turtle positions is that they free up your hands so that you can get into hand fighting from turtle position. If Placido has his elbows on the mat, it's hard for him to effectively hand fight because his weight is on his elbows. But when he takes his elbows and puts them on his own thighs, now when I try to get a grip on him, his hands bear no weight, his head is on the floor, and as a result, he can easily hand fight and make things quite difficult for me to get to my grips. Okay, so that would be a variation of a closed turtle position. You can see in this situation, the closure between elbow and thigh is still very good. So it's difficult for me to insert on. And at the same time, my opponent has an ability to hand fight, which is very strong. So this would be a variation of a closed turtle position, the so-called tripod turtle. With regards open turtle position, another variation of this would be a position often described as a referee's position, where my opponent's elbows come up off the mat. Now this creates a very open effect and a very wide base of support. And because my opponent's head is rising and the elbows are off the mat, he now has an ability to start standing up. So this would be an excellent variation of turtle position when you want to stand up from the ground and escape to a neutral position. Okay, so the 4 main varieties of turtle position that we use, will be closed turtle position, where I put my elbows inside my knees and we have a strong defensive position, just like so. Open turtle positions, where our elbows are away from the knees and our width of support is wider, like so. With regards closed turtle position, a sub-variation that we have to learn how to deal with are tripod variations, where I have only 3 points of contact with the mat and my hands are free to hand fight. And with open turtle positions, the referee's position, in which from here, our head is rising, and as a result, we're in a good position to start the action of standing up on our opponent and getting back up to our feet. So those are the 4 main varieties of turtle position that we will be attacking and discussing in this video. Each one has its good points, each one has its weaknesses. So we have open turtle position, closed turtle position, tripod turtle position, and referee's position. It's up to you as a developing student to know the distinction between the 4, what each one is good at, what each one is bad at, and how to attack each in turn and exploit the various weaknesses which manifest themselves in those 4 critical positions. The subject of this video will be how to break down all 4 of those turtle positions and do so in a way which exploits the various weaknesses of each. Now, we're going to be presenting a huge amount of information to you in this video, and often it can be a difficult thing for you to swallow a large amount of information in one gulp. So often I like the idea of giving you a simple, fundamental insight which gives direction to all of the information you'll receive in this video. The big insight that I want you working with right from the start is a simple dilemma which guides almost all of our turtle breakdown attacks. This is the dilemma between open and closed turtle positions. If I have an opponent in a turtle position in front of me, when I go to attack, the first thing that I look at will always be the relationship between his elbow and knee. The further the elbow and knees are apart, show me a referee's position. Here it's an extreme example where the elbow and knee are far apart. Elbows down. Here, there's some gap between the two, and there's quite a bit of gap between the tricep and the quadricep. This is a clear example of an open turtle position, okay? Whenever we observe an open turtle position, we know that it's going to be stable because of the width of our opponent's base, okay? But we also know it's going to be very easy to insert because of that space. If we see, on the other hand, a closed turtle position where the base narrows and the elbows go inside the knees, you know right from the start that it's going to be very difficult to insert. There's not a lot of space for us to work with. But on the other hand, the base of support is relatively narrow. And it's going to be easy to break his base down to the mat. That fundamental dilemma is the insight which guides much of this turtle position breakdown video. When you go to attack turtle position, your first question is this an open or a closed turtle situation? Whenever you see a closed turtle situation, all of your attacks are on your opponent's base of support because that's the fundamental weakness. As your opponent narrows his base to tighten up the turtle, he becomes more and more vulnerable to his base of support being attacked and being broken down to an inferior position. The more my opponent resists this by opening the turtle position, the more vulnerable he becomes to insertion-based attacks, where our thing from here is going to be to insert hooks on a training partner and start to go in on the attack from this position, okay? Learning to understand the difference between open and closed turtle position and how attacks upon one are complemented by attacks upon the other is the key insight which will guide your actions when it's time to attack turtle position. You must know the difference between open and closed turtle position and understand that closed turtle position are typically attacked through base of support, and open turtle positions are typically attacked through insertion of hooks. Once you understand this key insight, you'll always know exactly what to do from the second you make contact with an opponent. So if I'm behind an opponent after a takedown or in a guard passing and scramble, the first thing I do is I look at his turtle position, okay? In this case, it's a relatively open turtle position. So from here, my first thing will always be some form of insertion. And as a result, we can go directly in and start scoring our hooks and going on the attack. That stands in contrast to a closed situation, where from here, the first sort of attack that we'll be looking at will always be an attack on his base of support, okay, which takes him down to a broken down position from where the attacks will come in very quickly and very effectively. So, our number one consideration when we go hunting against the turtle position is this an open or a closed turtle situation? In one case, closed turtle, it's always an attack on his base of support. In the case of open turtle position, it'll always be an attack through some kind of insertion at wrist, knee, foot, what have you. Once you understand this simple dilemma, if my opponent closes up, attack the base of support. If my opponent opens up, attack via insertion. You'll always have good sense of direction in your attacks. You'll be able to seize control of the situation you're confronted by right from the start with a good sense of direction and attack with a sense of purpose. Now, we're looking at the idea of breaking down turtle position. There are two fundamental problems that you're going to have to deal with whenever you go to attack turtle position. the first of these central problems is that your opponent is in a pretty good defensive position. Turtle position gets portrayed as like this very risky position, which is not a good position at all for your opponent. It's actually a pretty good defensive position. If the guy in turtle position knows what he's doing, he can make your life surprisingly miserable from that position. There's a bunch of things that he can do from there to counterattack you and cause considerable consternation for you as the person trying to attack turtle position. Defensively and even offensively, it's a surprisingly strong position if performed well. And you have to break it down against a skilled opponent. You can run into problems pretty damn quickly. There are some powerful counters that my opponent can use and powerful escapes that my opponent can use, which can really ruin your ability to attack effectively against turtle position. Let's have a look at those right now. The first and most potentially damaging is a makikomi, or roll from bottom position. So if I have an opponent in turtle position, whenever I go to attack turtle position, I need to get some kind of grip on my opponent. I can't just hang out here and think I'm doing something constructive. I have to get a grip upon my opponent. Various forms of grip will expose me to makikomi rolls. Okay? If I put a hand here inside and my opponent traps my wrist and brings his wrist tight to his own sternum, he has an effective grip upon my body, Loctite. From here, when I go to pull my arm free, it's not as easy as it looks. It's like you put your hand into a goddamn bear trap and it's not easy to pull out, because my arm is getting wrapped around the geometry of my training partner's ribs. If you look at the grip, Placido is not holding my hand. He's hugging my wrist. And there's a sense here in which I cannot pull out because my whole arm is locked around the geometry of his rib cage. It's his rib cage which is holding me in place, not the hand. Many people here naively grab with their hand, and this is a weak grip. Okay, I can easily break that. But when he hugs, so that he's essentially holding me with his rib cage rather than his hand is just locking my arm around the rib cage. That's a serious problem. Not easy to pull away from. Now, in these situations, all he has to do is straighten out his left leg and put his shoulder down to the mat. And from here, I can get rolled through into a devastating pin where he controls my hips. Now, from this situation, it's very hard to extricate myself. I went from a good top position to a pin and bottom side control. Now, even though Placido's move doesn't actually score many points, it's not a sweep since it wasn't performed from guard position, it's still a bad thing for me. You went from top position on your opponent's back to getting 100% pinned and bottom side control. And then it's a pretty easy thing for Placido to step over into the mounted position. Now he's just scored 4 points on me. So that's a terrible, terrible outcome. This is probably the single most common problem we run into when we go to attack turtle position. Let's have a look at it again. So the problem is we're here attacking turtle position and we reach inside our opponent's rib cage. We have to, you got to get a grip on this guy. And we injudiciously let him trap the arm and his shoulder starts going down to the mat. And as a result, we get sucked into a rotation and pinned underneath our opponent. So that's the first big problem that we face. Second big problem we face is a variation of this, where our opponent uses what I believe is the best all-round move that a bottom turtle position player can use defensively. This is a sit-back escape, where my opponent takes his inside leg and puts it up, and from here, he sits back to his hip, and as a result, he goes back into a guard position. So he turns what was a turtle position into a situation where he faces me. So going back to turtle, here I have my opponent's back because I'm behind his elbows and I have chest to back contact. Placido puts his leg up and sits and brings his elbow between us. Once his elbow comes between us, I no longer have his back. And as a result, you're now in guard position. You're no longer in turtle position, being put back in guard. So this sit back escape is probably the single most versatile and safe method of recovering from a turtle position. That's probably the one we run into more than any other when we go to attack turtle position. A third form of escape is for our opponent, instead of sitting back and away from us, is to put his near side shoulder down to the mat and perform a forward shoulder roll. Okay, so if I'm here with my training partner, he puts the near side shoulder down, goes into a forward roll. Then he puts me back in guard position. Okay, this too is a very popular and very effective form of escape. So here I have my training partner's back. He puts the near side shoulder, goes through, and now I no longer have my opponent's back. He's put his legs between he and I, and as a result, we're back in guard. A fourth form of escape, often seen when you go from people from other grappling styles, such as wrestling or judo, is they stand up on you. Okay, this typically involves situations where the elbows have to come off the mat and into a referee's position, like so. And then they obviously don't stay in a position like this. They quickly put either outside or inside leg up. And from here, they stand up either to a tripod, or they stand up, go back down, with their head and shoulders up, fight the hands, and stand up to their feet and go back to a neutral position. Okay? So these four methods of escape: the makikomi roll, where my opponent pins my arm to his chest and ultimately pins me. That's probably the most damaging form of escape. Then a sit-back escape, where my opponent takes the inside leg, puts it up, and sits back into guard position. Then a shoulder roll, where my opponent puts the near side shoulder down and rolls through into guard position. And then a standing escape, where my opponent takes his elbows off the mat and stands up to his feet and turns to face me. Okay, understand that when someone uses a standing escape, the main method is always to come up, like so. When their body comes up in vertical like this, they're fighting the hands. It's very, very hard for an opponent now to stop you from getting up to the feet. So those are the main situations that you, as a developing student, will have to overcome. We're going to spend some time looking at how to get around these four problems. But understand those are the main four problems that you will have to deal with. We'll look at how to deal with them in the course of this video. Probably over 90% of the counters that we run into when we go to attack turtle position come out of those four counters and escapes. Now, we're trying to understand our turtle breakdown program in terms of two central problems. The first central problem is your opponent has four highly effective counters to your ability to attack turtle position. The second big problem is the connection between your opponent's elbow and knee. The tighter that connection, the more difficult it's going to be for us as the attacking athlete to insert our hooks and score the 4 points that we're looking for in our turtle breakdowns. Understand that when we go to attack turtle position, the most desirable outcome is going to be us getting 2 hooks in on our opponent. That scores the highest points in jiu-jitsu, 4 points. And it sets us up to go into the single most high percentage finishing hold in the sport, strangles from the back. Okay? So the best outcome that we can look for when we go to attack turtle position is 2 hooks in to score our points, and the securing of the rear mount position, which enables us to use the single best finishing hold in all of jiu-jitsu, strangles from the back. That's always our best outcome. His number one method of stopping that from happening is connection of elbow and knee. If Placido is behind me and has, for example, a seatbelt grip sitting behind me, my number one method of defense to stop Placido getting hooks in is always going to be elbow and knee connection. If my elbows and knees are not connected, it's so easy for him to get hooks in. Now he's got 4 points and he's ready to start strangling me. But if, on the other hand, I have elbow and knee connected, when he goes to put hooks in, it's difficult work. And we can form effective defenses to our training partner, which will make it very difficult for him now to work effectively from this position. Okay? So always what we're fighting against, whether we're seated or if my opponent's in a turtle position, is that problem of the elbow and knee connection. It's that which makes it hard for me to insert hooks and get to our preferred rear mount position, which gets us the highest score in the sport and enables us to start our best finishing game, strangles from the back. Elbow and knee are connected. It's hard for me to insert now on my opponent, hard for me to get in there and get the hooks that I'm looking for. Okay? But if the elbow and knee are far apart, then suddenly from here, insertion becomes a very realistic way of attacking. Okay? So always, our big problem is how are we going to break the connection between elbow and knee? The better we are at breaking the elbow-knee connection, the better you're going to be at getting those hooks in, scoring your 4 points, and getting to the number one finishing hold in the sport, strangles from the back from rear mount. So that's the second central problem of attacking turtle position. The first central problem is how we're going to deal with our opponent's escapes and counters while we're trying to attack. And the second central problem is how are we going to undermine and defeat the elbow-knee connection so that we can score the biggest points in the sport and get to our favorite finishing position. Now, when it's time for us to start attacking a turtle position, there are 4 main stances that we need to be strong at to maximize our attacking ability. Turtle position is a position for which my opponent can easily stand up, can roll me over, can sit back to guard, can shoulder roll to guard. It's a difficult position to control someone from. So what we need is a strong attacking stance that does something to undermine and frustrate his ability to counter us as we go to control him. One good way to think about this is to identify 4 very good stances. Each one has its good points and its bad points. And from those 4 stances, we launch most of our attacks on turtle position. I do favor one of these 4 stances as the one I use most of the time, a kind of go-to stance. But let's be honest, we're going to be using all 4. So it's important you know what they are and what they're good at, what they're bad at. Okay, we've got a turtle position in front of us. We'll face this way. From here, when we go to attack a turtle position, the question is, how should I hold myself so that I can get some kind of good, realistic control over my opponent and launch my attacks? The first stance that we're going to look at is the inside hip stance. And in my opinion, this is the most versatile. And if I could only have one method of attacking turtle position, I'd probably choose this one. Fortunately, you don't ever have to make that choice. You've got 4 good methods. They're all good, but this is the one I'd probably use more than any other. Okay, we're going to start off with our knee close to our training partner's knee and my knee over the far hip. Okay, so my knee touches on the far hip on this side and my knee is right behind his knee on the near side. I'm at an angle to my opponent so that I go facing a diagonal line that goes from my opponent's near hip to the far shoulder. Okay, from this position, this gives me the advantage of my hips being higher than my opponent's hips, and I have a knee on each side of his body. The advantage of this is that if Placido went for a makikomi roll, I would end up in a situation where I'm still behind my opponent. Okay, as opposed to a situation where if I have 2 knees on one side of my opponent's body and my opponent hits me with a makikomi roll, I end up in a pin. I'm no longer lined up behind my opponent. Okay? So the beauty of the inside hip position is it guarantees in a worst case scenario where you get rolled, you're still behind your opponent. You still have a knee on each side of his body. Again, if I have 2 knees on one side of Placido's body and I get hit with a roll, you end up being pinned. If, on the other hand, I have a knee on each side of his body and I get hit with the makikomi roll, at least I'm still behind him. I still have a knee on each side of his body. Remember that back control is always defined by an opponent between my knees. That is the fundamental insight behind back control. You see the position facing this way. From any situation where I'm behind my opponent, if I have him between my knees, I'm winning. If I'm behind my opponent and I have my opponent outside of my knees, he can win from here. By tackling my legs, he wins. So whenever we're behind an opponent, the fundamental directive that we must always obey, you've got to keep them between your knees. That's fundamental. Wherever we fall now, you're still going to be on his back as long as he's between your knees. But the moment you have 2 knees, you can be on his back, and it means very little. He just grabs my legs and you're pinned. This is not a good position at all. It looks like I'm on his back, but I'm not because he's not between my knees. So the beauty of the inside hip position is it more or less guarantees that your opponent will be between your knees. the fundamental directive of back position. Okay. It also ensures that your hips will be higher than his hips, which is a very valuable thing when opponents start going into defensive spirals and trying to turn and face you. Okay. So if I have a guy in turtle position, this one, facing this one, from here, Placido's number one method of escape is always going to be the inside sit, where he turns to face me and put me back in guard. That is the most high percentage way of recovering from turtle position. Okay, the sit back method. Look what happens in a sit back. My opponent's shoulder comes down towards the mat, and as he turns away from me, the legs come in, and now his legs are between he and I. He's back in guard position. It all starts with that far side shoulder going down towards the floor. That's what makes the inside leg come up, and now his knees are facing me, his elbows come between us, and he's back in guard. Okay? If I have the inside hip position here, like so, now my hips are higher than his. So when he brings that shoulder down to the floor, you will always be able to follow his movement and keep him between your knees. And as we know, as long as he stays between my knees, you're in a winning position on the back. Okay? So that's why I put such a heavy emphasis on the inside hip position. That's why, in my opinion, it's the single most useful stance for attacking turtle position. Thankfully, we have many stances to attack turtle position, and they're all good in their own way. They're all bad in their own unique ways. There are weaknesses to all of them, but this one has a lot of strengths and very few weaknesses. So if you're in doubt, maybe you're just starting off the sport of jiu-jitsu, you're only in your first few weeks of training, and you're wondering to yourself, okay, there's 4 stances out there. Which one should I use? You can't go wrong using this stance. Okay, so if you want to simplify the game a little bit, and you're first starting off, you're a beginner student, use this one. Okay, it'll never let you down. There are some things that other stances do better than this for certain situations. But when you're looking for a simple guide and just give me one thing that I can use when I'm attacking turtle position, this is the one to go for. I'll show it to you one more time. From a situation where we have a turtle position in front of us, we just go straight down. I have a knee on the floor on this side, a knee over the hip on the other, so my hips are higher than his hips, and I have a knee on each side of his body. Okay, you can't go wrong with that. Now when we form a connection to our opponent's body, you're well suited. You're well positioned now to stay on your opponent's back, keep your hips behind him, and most importantly, keep them between your knees. Okay, so that's just a great way for you to work right from the start. Okay, second method of holding a stance to attack turtle position. The inside hip has one of my favorite. Another one which is very good in certain circumstances and can be a valuable part of your game is an outside hip. Okay, what's an outside hip? That's a situation where my opponent's here in turtle position. Instead of me putting my inside hip over my opponent's back, like so, I'm going to put the outside of my hip here with my training partner. I'll take my knees off the floor. Okay. The beauty of this grip is it puts great weight over your opponent's hip. When he tries, for example, to sit back to guard, there's so much weight over his hip, it's actually pretty hard for the guy to do so. Like, in order to put me back in guard, this leg has to come up. Okay? An outside hip puts tremendous weight over the near hip. And as a result, it's actually, Placido will tell you, it's actually pretty hard to sit to guard under these circumstances. If he goes to stand up on you, it puts considerable weight over the hip, makes that difficult, makes it slow down. And it creates a situation where even as he goes to stand, you create a very good ability to throw a hook in. Okay? So this can be a valuable addition to your turtle position attacks. Okay? It's a nice stance which works really well in specific situations. Specifically, the situations where you want to weight the near side hip, because your opponent is typically looking to unweight that to sit the guard position. Okay, so if I know this guy wants to sit the guard position, right? It's a good way to weight that near side hip. The key is don't put your body on the floor. When your body goes on the floor, there's no weight on the guy. Okay, so we want our knees off the mat, and now you have 2 drive legs. This gives you great mobility to walk around your opponent's body because your knees are not on the mat. So one of the great advantages of it, it has good mobility. Secondly, it puts tremendous weight over your opponent's hip. So when he goes to sit to guard, he feels like there's the weight of the world on his hips. The more he fights to get up to his base, the more he exposes that near side hook, and now we can simply throw a hook in, and end up in good attacking position. So this too is a nice addition to your turtle attack arsenal. It's a good way to hold and control people. Now, we're going to look at a third stance, which is also very useful for attacking turtle position. This is a knee wedge, okay? The idea behind a knee wedge is that there's a little space between my opponent's tricep and quadricep. Sometimes the space is bigger, sometimes the space is smaller. Depends on how your opponent holds himself. But I got some good news for you. As long as the space is less than the width of your kneecap, which is actually pretty damn small, you can always exploit it with a knee wedge. No matter how tightly my opponent locks up his turtle position, there's always a space in there for my knee to drive inside and wedge behind my training partner's tricep. Okay? And this gives us one excellent way of controlling our opponent. The beauty of the knee wedge is that it puts us in a position to control our training partner's head. It puts our head right over our opponent's head. And it creates a situation where you have an unweighted foot, because all of my weight is on my right foot. And as a result, my left foot becomes completely unweighted. And as a result, very easy for us to step into some of our favorite breakdown attacks, crucifixes. So it creates a weighted leg and an unweighted leg. Now, this is a good thing, but it does come at a price. That price, as I'm sure you've just guessed, is that it puts two of my knees on one side of his body. And we all know that can be a problem, okay? If I'm naive in this position and my opponent traps my wrist and rolls me through, it can create a situation where you get pinned, okay? So, as good as it is in some respects, it does have a danger associated with it. Now, as you get better and better at attacking from turtle position, you'll realize it's not the end of the world if you get swept in a makikomi. You can recover from it and end up still in a very good attacking position. But when you're first starting off in jiu-jitsu, you should be aware that it does have the defect of putting both of your knees on one side of his body, which does have some risk associated with it. It's not the end of the world. There's still good things you can do. But you should be aware of that risk, okay? So once again, if my knee penetrates in behind, it creates an unweighted leg. That's good, because from here we can step into back crucifixes. It puts my head directly over his head. That's a good thing. If I should feel my opponent's trying to roll me through, you can quickly switch. So it's not a complete disaster. Because your legs move quickly in that position, you can switch to another form of turtle stance and recover. But be aware that if you're naive in your application of the move, because it does put two knees on one side of the body, there is some risk of your opponent trapping your arm, rolling you through, and pinning you, okay? If you understand that risk and you know how to deal with it, it won't be a problem for you. But if you're naive in the application of the move, it can create problems for you in the manner we just saw. So, those are three very good attacking stances to attack turtle position. There is a fourth one, which I favor a lot, especially in scramble situations off a takedown. You've just thrown someone down to the ground, they landed in a turtle position. This is one of my favorite ways to attack. This is the horse ride position. Okay, we've got an opponent here in turtle position. We go in, we put two knees right around our training partner's hips. So none of my knees are on the floor. Normally from here, inside hip, we have a knee on the mat, okay? In this situation, instead of having a knee on the mat, I put my knee on top of his quadricep. So you're like a jockey riding a horse. Now, don't be naive and go directly behind your opponent. That's not the idea. The idea is that I want to line up on a diagonal line from shoulder to opposite hip, okay? And from this position, you have tremendous mobility, because in this situation, none of your knees are on the mat. It has several virtues. First, mobility. No knees on the mat means it's a very fast attacking position. Okay. Second, your hips are higher than your opponent's hips. That's always a good thing in a scramble situation. Okay. And thirdly, it places one knee on each side of the body, so that in a worst case scenario where he traps my arm and hits a makikomi, you'll always have him between your knees. Okay. So this is a really good way of initially attacking a turtle position. It's also highly compatible with the inside hip position, because anytime you have a horse ride position, if you're just touching it on the floor, you're an inside hip. So these two tend to work together really well together. Okay, so very often when I go to attack a turtle position, especially off a failed takedown, we come in and our first lock just like so. So it gives me a tremendous ability to ride over an opponent and stay connected to their hips. It puts weight on his hips. If he goes, for example, to roll to guard position, it'll give me the ability to stay over his hips. Okay, make it very easy for us now to keep our knees on each side of his body and go to work in this position in the usual fashion. Okay. In addition, when we have a horse ride on our training partner, it's so easy for us to just convert to inside hip, and conversely, to go back. It's very easy for us to go through on a training partner, and from here, get to some of our favorite attacking positions in the sport. It has, as I said, the advantages of your hips higher than his hips, one knee on each side of his body, and an ability to transition very quickly to other turtle stances and move around your opponent's body since you have no knees on the mat. So those are 4 highly effective ways of operating against the turtle position. 4 stances that we make use of almost every time we go to attack turtle position. Each one of those 4 has its good points and its bad points. If you only had one for the rest of your life, I'd probably go with inside hip. Okay, if I was ever in doubt, which stance should I use, I'd probably go inside hip. But thankfully, you don't have to make that decision. You can play between the 4. Understand that these are not competitive choices. You don't go like, use that one, but not this one. All 4 of them are good. All 4 of them will be used by you in time to attack turtle position. And whenever you have one, you always have the other 3. Okay? So if I have a guy in turtle position, there is absolutely no reason why I can't flow between these 4 stances. Okay, we first go in, we might go in with a horse stance. And from here, I might convert to outside hip. Then I might run across the other side of the body and go outside hip, just like so. Then from here, I might take my arm through and block like so. Then I might always make a switch back to the other side, inside hip. I might come back up and from this situation, start throwing the various hooks in that fashion. So you can see it's not a difficult thing for me to go through all 4 stances and use all 4 in combination in a short period of time. That's really the spirit that I want you working with. Don't see the 4 stances as competitors. Use one, but not the other. There's no right or wrong here. Understand that each one of the 4 has its good points and bad points. Okay, the best turtle attackers are those who use all 4 stances in unison. Just like a boxer throws combination punches, we use combination stances. But if you're first starting out in the sport and maybe you're a little confused and not sure which way to go, just go with inside hip because it's probably the most versatile of the 4. Now, when it's time to start attacking turtle position, one of the first things that you're going to realize when you get into live sparring is things happen quickly from turtle position. There's a reason for that. Most jiu-jitsu athletes identify turtle position as a position of danger. Your opponent is on your back. Okay? No jiu-jitsu player likes having someone on their back. It's always a risky thing. And they're aware that you're in a position where if you just get 2 hooks in, you're going to get the biggest score in the sport. And you're now in a position to secure the most high percentage strangles in the sport. So people aren't going to be happy that you've gotten turtle position on. They're going to look to actively counter you very quickly, and it can all happen in a very short period of time. So we have to be able to start getting on the attack in a short period of time. So it's important that you, as a developing athlete, can quickly identify the targets of your attack. There are 3 of them. Okay, we have a guy in turtle position. The first big target that we're going to be looking at, and arguably the most important one, is going to be your opponent's hips. Okay, the hips are the target which I favor first and foremost on all of my opponents. The second big target will be the head, and the third big target will be the wrists. Okay, and those are the 3 targets that we work with when we go to attack turtle position: hips, head, and wrists. Okay, so it's so important. I'll say it again. When we go to attack turtle position, the first and primary target is the hips. The second is our opponent's head. And the third will be our opponent's wrists. Okay, almost everything that we do when we go to attack turtle position is going to be an attack on one of those three targets: hips, head, wrists. Okay, our first goal in this video is going to be looking at attacking the hips, since that's where most of our turtle attacks occur. Okay, I'm going to show you now the weapons that we use to control the hips and get some kind of advantage upon our opponent. Okay, whenever we go to attack the hips, the number one method that we employ are variations of the tight waist grip. Okay, what is a tight waist grip? That's any grip where we go around our opponent's waist with varying degrees. I can go shallow to the hip. I can go deep to the near hip. I can go here, cross lapel. This is one which I'm going to put a lot of emphasis on in this video, since it's a gi video. And we can also go reverse tight waist, like so. Normally in my tight waist, I face my opponent's head. We can also go reverse tight waist. All of them control the hips. Okay, so once again, various grips. I can go shallow here at the hip. I can go deep, elbow deep, here at the hip. I can go cross lapel, like so. And I can go reverse tight waist, like so. All of them are grips around our training partner's waist. When he goes to move around from here, the hips are controlled. And as a result, it's going to be very easy for us to go into the various forms of attack that we're looking at throughout this video, to start getting hooks in and scoring your points. Okay, so that will be the first major target of our attack when we go into turtle position. So from a situation where we start off with hands on an opponent, when we first go in, that attack on the hips through the tight waist is going to be one of our big guns. Okay, let's have a look now at some more detail with regards to the various tight waist variations. What are their good points? What are their bad points? So we've got an opponent here in turtle position. From here, in a deep tight waist, there is some risk associated with a deep tight waist, because it will give your opponent access to your wrist and therefore a makikomi counter. Okay, so when I come in on an opponent and I go deep around the waist, I am giving him my wrist. I should be aware of that. It's a good grip. It's very strong for off-balancing people, but it does come at the price of wrist exposure. Now my opponent can trap my wrist, and if I have two knees on one side of his body and he commits to a makikomi, you can end up getting pinned. So from here, I go in, I score, and I've got to be cognizant of wrist exposure. This might lead me to adopt another form of tight waist, a shallow tight waist, where I pull wrist deep. Instead of going elbow deep around my training partner's waist, I go wrist deep. Doesn't look like much, right? It's actually fantastically controlling. It does come at a price. The grip is not as secure, but I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at how much leverage and control you can have on someone just with a wrist deep grip. It also means that it's easy for us to switch from side to side on a training partner and get in on a man and get to our attacks. Okay, so if I'm worried about my opponent's ability to get to a makikomi, from here, I'm worried that he might trap my wrist, I might go shallow. When he tries to trap my wrist now, it ain't happening. Okay, so this generates much less wrist exposure. It comes at the price that it's not quite as secure, but it's pretty secure. It's a fairly strong grip with very little danger associated with it. One of the very best grips, and one which I'm going to strongly urge you to use anytime your opponent is using a jacket or you're in a gi situation, is to go underneath your opponent's arm and secure the tight waist with this grip here, the cross lapel grip. So if we have an opponent here, we're going to go through, we're going to open up our training partner's jacket, and going underneath his two arms, we're going to lock here across my training partner's body. Don't go up high. You're not trying to strangle someone. There's no need to go high. You're better off going well below the sternum and locking up here, okay? This is a fantastically strong grip. It takes an already good grip to tight waist and makes it considerably stronger, okay? If I'm going against someone with a jacket on, rather than just lock a tight waist, I'm almost always going to take the extra time and get this grip. Make sure that your thumb is below his sternum. He goes down to turtle position. And from here, this gives you tremendous control of your training partner's body with very little wrist exposure. When he goes for a makikomi, he's going to trap my wrist to do it. He'll never get a deep bite on the wrist, okay? If I go in tight waist, elbow deep, I'm giving him my wrist. But when I go in here and secure this grip, almost no wrist exposure, and it's twice as strong as an unsupported hand. This gives you essentially a rope around your opponent's hips, okay? Sitting up. It's like a rope. You can see a line of tension running through my training partner's jacket. Go stand up on me. It's just a fantastically strong grip, okay? There's a sense in which I want you guys to think about the gi for what it is. The gi is a force multiplier. That's really what a gi is. When people say, what's the difference between gi training and no gi training? It's simple. The gi is a force multiplier. It makes everything you do without a gi twice as strong and twice as effective. Strangleholds without a gi are good. Strangleholds with a gi are literally twice as strong. It multiplies the amount of force with the same amount of effort upon your opponent. These grips take an already great grip to tight waist and greatly multiply its effect and halve the amount of risk associated with them. So if the guy's got a jacket on, use it, man. It's there to be used, okay? It's like, if you're not using it, you're just not taking advantage of something that's there and costs you nothing and leads to great effects. So when I use a tight waist behind an opponent, I put two hands underneath his arms and I use a lapel feed sitting up. I use a lapel feed where one hand feeds to the other. Don't just naively reach and try to grab. Use one hand to feed the other. Only takes a quarter of a second and doubles the effectiveness of the grip. Okay? Again, don't just reach. Lock, feed. Lock it in. Elbow comes back to the hip. He goes down defensive, tries to trap my wrist. It ain't happening. It's just such a powerful tool to make use of. If it's there, use it. Okay? Now, he goes to sit to guard. Impossible. If I want to put him down to the hip, it's so easy. He goes to stand up on me. It's impossible. Okay? I'm not going to lie to you. When you go to control your opponent's hip in a situation where your opponent's wearing a gi, get to your cross lapel tight waist. No one likes a tight waist grip more than I do. In the no-gi situation, my athletes use it all the time. You'll look at my athletes, you'll see them making use of it all the time. But when the gi is on, use it. It's better than a regular tight waist. Okay, there's just no getting around that. It's a force multiplier, which will make you a more effective attacker of turtle position. If you're first starting off in this sport, and these are your early days of development, you couldn't go wrong when you go to attack turtle position by using this as your primary first grip, okay? I'm never gonna say to you, as a coach, I'm never gonna say to you, only use this grip, okay? I'm not that kind of coach. I like to see people using variations in grips. I like to see people combining moves together. But when you first start off, it's nice just to have a go-to move, okay? It's all confusing. You're like, what do I do? There's so many moves, okay? If you're first starting off, my advice to you is this. Come up towards your opponent. He's in turtle position. Take the inside hip stance. Put two hands behind your opponent and use a 2-on-1 lapel feed and get to this grip. Okay? He goes for any defensive move from this position. He'll never do it. You'll always better control him. And from here, you'll score. Okay? It's just a fantastic initial grip to use on your opponent. Inside hip stance with cross lapel, tight waist. You just can't go wrong. Okay? It's just a great, great way to work. Now, we've looked at the idea of elbow deep tight waist, a wrist deep tight waist, and our favorite, the cross lapel tight waist whenever we're working with a jacket on. Now let's look at the fourth grip, which controls our opponent's hips. This is a reverse tight waist. This is a little more advanced. people might be upset that I'm teaching this in a fundamentals program. Some of the things I teach in fundamentals are often considered a more advanced move, but there's nothing intrinsically difficult about this move. I teach it beginners all the time and they get good results with it. Instead of me facing my opponent's head, we're going to face the hips. So normally when we have a tight waist, we face forwards towards our opponent's head, okay? This time we're going to put our knee inside, we're going to come through, and we're going to get a tight waist grip on our opponent. Now you can't use the gi on this one, but you can use your own leg, okay? What we're going to do is we're going to go through and put a hand on our own thigh. So my knee penetrates, my tight waist comes in, and I just put a hand inside my own thigh, okay? Now you have effective control of your opponent's hips. When he goes to move around from here, it's an excellent position from where we can just step over our training partner's leg and we just sag down to the floor and point our knee at the ceiling, and you now have an excellent ability to get a hook in on your training partner, okay? So, take the gi off. From here, my knee penetrates through, my hand goes around the corner, and we lock up on our own thigh. I put my foot over the top of my training partner's calf muscle, and from here, when we sit down to the floor, my knee points at the ceiling, and it's so easy for us under these circumstances to put a hook in. Once we get the hook in, we put our knee over our training partner's hip, and it's a pretty easy thing for us now to shift our hips down and end up on our training partner's back. So once again, turtle situation. We're here attacking. Knee comes through and step. Now we've got a nice little breakdown and we're ready to attack. So this reverse tight waist can be a useful addition whenever you find yourself in unorthodox scramble positions which lie outside the norm. Do we use this as often as the conventional methods? Absolutely not. It's not a primary attack, but it is a useful one in uncontrolled scramble situations where conventional methods perhaps aren't working as well as you'd like, and it can be a useful addition to your game, even at beginner level. Now, with that in mind, we've got an opponent in turtle position. From here, our primary thing here is controlling the hips. We go through, there's an elbow deep grip, there's a shallow grip. We could also use the jacket, that's also very good, or we could go reverse tight waist. But my advice to you as a beginner is stay facing your opponent's head, lock up on your training partner, control the waist, and from here, we do all of our work, okay? So that's how we control the waist through the tight waist series. 4 methods of controlling the tight waist position: elbow deep, wrist deep, cross lapel, and reverse tight waist. 4 great ways to control the hips and make that your primary attack against turtle position. Now, we're dealing with the realities of attacking a turtle position against a resisting opponent. We've seen there's a bunch of things our opponent can do to counter us as we go to attack. Okay? He's got some good moves to use from the bottom position. You must get away from thinking that turtle position is just this completely defensive position where your opponent's kind of helpless, and it's not like that at all. You get someone who knows how to use turtle position, they can sweep you over from there, they can stand up on you, they can do all kinds of things. So it's important that you, as a developing athlete, have this ability to quickly identify a target and get on the attack, because things happen quickly in a turtle position against a good opponent. They're not just going to stay there inert and wait for you to attack them. They're going to be looking to actively move from there. So it's very, very important that we develop the ability to quickly identify targets and get into your attacks. Now, there are 3 targets that we focus on when we go into attack turtle position. These are always the hips, the head, and the wrists. Okay? And when we go to attack turtle position, our first thing is, which one of these 3 targets are we going to work with? Is it going to be hips, is it going to be head, or is it going to be wrists? I'm not going to lie to you, most of the time we start on the hips. Okay, that's our particular approach to attacking back position. You pretty much can't go wrong with that. But let me tell you, a close second place is going to be the head. The head is a great place to attack turtle position. There is one primary grip which everyone favors above all others when we go to attack turtle position, especially at fundamental level. This is the so-called seatbelt grip, or back, head, and arm, as we refer to it down in the basement. This refers to any situation where my opponent is here in front of us, and we have one arm that goes over our training partner's arm, one arm that goes under, and from here we lock up either a 5-finger or a palm-to-palm grip on our training partner. I personally favor 5-finger grips, like so, but a lot of good people also like palm-to-palm grips as well. Okay. The idea here is that we create a strangle arm that goes over the top and a control arm that goes underneath. This does an excellent job of locking my chest to his back and enables me to use my shoulder to cover my training partner's head and put pressure down on the head. Okay. As a general rule in turtle position, if my opponent wants to stand up, it all begins at the head. As the head rises, he can start to stand up. Okay. If my opponent goes to put me back in guard position, the knee rises and the head moves away, and he puts me back in guard position. If my opponent goes to roll to put me back in guard, it starts with the head. The head ducks and puts us back. Okay. So you can see most of the standard defenses to turtle position involve movement of the head. So if we can lock the head down and control it, that's money in the bank. That's going to make our job a whole lot easier. There is no more controlling method at fundamentals level and all the way up to advanced world championship level to control the head than the seatbelt. It provides an excellent set of closed wedges around your opponent's head and one arm that's going to make you very dangerous to your opponent. At any given moment, you're just a heartbeat away from switching from seatbelt to a stranglehold. It's very robust, no matter how tired your body is from hard training. Once you lock that grip and keep your chest tight to his body, you're going to find you're very, very effective in that position. Okay. As a general rule, when we go to lock up seatbelt, it's possible to work with extended arms. You can do that, but most of the time we're looking to shorten our arms and bring our shoulder forward. Okay, so the general bias, you don't always have to do this. Don't get me wrong, if you're a little tired and you're going to kind of go on cruise control from seatbelt and have a little more extension in your arms and rest for a while. But when it's time to attack, we typically bring everything close and the shoulder comes forward. Okay, so we're here working with our training partner. From a situation like this, it's not difficult for us to go in and lock and then watch my shoulder goes on top of the head. If my shoulder is below the head can still rise, still cause problems. It's not the end of the world. You still got a seatbelt. It's still a good position. But most of the time, we like to take the play in our shoulder and put our shoulder on top of the head and force the head down. So when my opponent goes to move around, the head is being controlled. This will create situations where it's very easy for us to turn and roll opponents in ways that we'll be looking at later on in this video and control the man. Okay. There's a sense in which what we're doing here is we're taking the head and forcing the head into a forward roll so that our opponent's body gets broken down to his back. Okay. You can use this out of almost all of the main stances that we looked at. Okay. So from inside hip, you can lock a seatbelt. From the horse ride, you can lock a seatbelt. From all the way out here and outside hip, it's not a difficult thing to lock a seatbelt. And probably the position which is most associated with seatbelts would be the knee wedge. When my knee comes in, and that puts us so close to our opponent's head that locking a seatbelt becomes very, very strong indeed. And this is often used in conjunction with crucifix attacks to create a very, very strong attacking position. Okay, the seatbelt is absolutely one of the core attacking methods when it's time to go in and lock up your opponent, control the head when you go to attack turtle position. This must become a big part of your developing arsenal in the sport. It works equally well, gi and no gi, and it's impossible to overstate the significance of this holding grip to base our attacks on turtle position. This forms a great secondary method of controlling the human body when we go to attack the turtle position. So if we have turtle position, if our primary method of attacking is at our opponent's hips, then the secondary method And for some people, this will actually be the first method, is to go in and attack the head first, okay? So when we go in on turtle position, typically we'll start at the hips and then we'll come up to the head, okay? And you can see it's a beautiful transition between controlling the hips on one hand and controlling the head on the other. If you can play the game between hips and head, you will be a very good attacker of turtle position. Okay, I want you to really focus on this idea of transitioning between the hips and the head. When you can go effortlessly from one to the other, you will be a difficult person to stop when it's time to attack turtle position. Okay, so once again, target number one, the hips. Target number two, the head. And once we get to control the head in situations like this, we're going to see there's a mountain of ways for us to really make ourselves a serious threat to your opponent. So if we're going to attack the head, the method I urge you to use more than any other, there are different methods, but the one we use more than anything else is the good old seatbelt, or back, head, and arm, as we often refer to it, as the primary method of getting that head, taking it out of position and forcing the head downwards into positions where your opponent can't really do the normal methods of escape and counter. Now, we're looking at the idea of identifying the primary targets when we go into attack a turtle position. We've identified 3 primary targets. You've got to become strong at attacking all 3. These are the hips, the head, and now the third one, the wrists. Now you hear me saying plural, the wrists. Your opponent's got 2 wrists. You want to be able to attack both. There's pros and cons to each. Okay. The wrist has several advantages over the others, and also, as you probably guessed, several disadvantages. Let's look first at the advantages of attacking with the wrists. Guys, in a tight turtle position, face the wall. Okay. If my opponent has an open turtle position, there is no reason why we can't go in and control the hips. There is no reason why I can't go in and control the head. But if my opponent has a closed turtle position, it might be very difficult for me to get elbow deep on the hips. It might be very difficult for me to come in here. He can hand fight and stop me, particularly if your opponent is fond of the tripod turtle position, where he puts his elbows in here. Seatbelts might now become very difficult because he can hand fight. His face towards the camera. When my opponent goes into a tripod turtle, look how his hands are free. So when I try to get my seatbelt, he's just hand fighting me. You got a strong hand fighter, it's not easy to get to your seatbelt. Don't get me wrong, we all love the seatbelt, okay? But if your opponent knows how to hand fight, it's not easy, okay? So what do we do in these circumstances, okay? What we do is we go in behind the elbows. If I go in front of the elbows, he can always hand fight me. But if I go in behind the elbows, you'll always be able to access your opponent's wrist with a one-on-one. Hand fighting occurs in front of the elbows. You go in behind them, and you win the hand fight every time. So that's one consideration. Takes away the hand fight. Second consideration. From here, if my opponent's in a tight turtle position, like so, it can be very hard for me to get a deep, tight waist. It can be very hard for me to get a seatbelt. But one thing you can always get is a wrist. Why? Because the only thing you need to do, or the only thing you need to penetrate with, is the width of your hand. If I penetrate with the width of my elbow, it's a big deal. My opponent closes up, hard to get in there, okay? But one thing you can always do is make your hand into a knife shape, just very slender. And just as a knife cuts through strong material very easily, your hand cuts through defensive material very easily. So from here, my hand will punch through and get to a wrist, no matter how tight the defensive turtle. But it can be very difficult to get through hand fights and elbow position to get to a tight waist or a seatbelt. In those circumstances, we might well decide to go through and punch in with that knife-like hand and get to a wrist. Now, the advantages of attacking the wrist, as we saw, that you can often go behind the elbows and avoid a hand fight. And secondly, you can get through small holes in your opponent's turtle position and get to a wrist much easier than you can to a seatbelt or a tight waist. Those are the advantages. What's the price? The price is wrist exposure. When I go in here and I punch on the far side, my opponent can trap my wrist.
And now he can take me over. And if I'm naive, I can be taken over into Makikomi. So, with that in mind, we have to understand there are two wrists. There is a near side and there is a far side. The Makikomi danger is always on the far side. So if I go through far side and he traps my wrist, there's a potential for Makikomi. But if I go through near side, there's no Makikomi. Okay, so if I feel my opponent is a Makikomi specialist and he's waiting for me, I'm sure you all have that one guy in the gym, right? He's 250 pounds, the big fat guy, and he traps your wrist and Makikomis. You're like, oh, it happened again. Okay, don't go far side on these guys. They lock up that wrist, you're going for a ride. Okay, that's not what you're looking for. So in these circumstances, we go in near side and lock it up. Now there's no Makikomi. Okay, you have to roll far side for Makikomi. You can't do it near side. And as a result, you've got to a wrist. Once we get to a wrist, we're going to see later on in this video, there's a mountain of good attacks that we can work with. Now, when we go to attack a wrist, I'm saying wrist, but you don't really grab the wrist at all. If I grab the wrist, my opponent can straighten his arm and easily escape. What we grab is the edge of the hand, the blade of the hand, and I lock in here. When my opponent goes to straighten his wrist, it's never going to happen. So I'm being lazy when I say to you, you grab the wrist. You don't really grab the wrist at all. You grab the blade of the hand. Now, let's come close to the camera. Let's take a seated position in front of the camera. Seated. So, if I grab the wrist, he straightens the arm, he breaks out. Strong straighten, I'll try to hold tight. I don't care how strong you are, you're not going to be able to hold against a strong guy. Okay. When I grip the edge of the hand, the edge that you would use when you go for a chop, we lock up here. We use 4 fingers around the edge and we hold in like so, like we're throttling a motorcycle. When he goes to straighten out now, it's impossible. Now, let's all understand it's illegal for us to start grabbing individual fingers. Okay. It's illegal in competition, and in the gym, it's the source of strong personality disputes on the mats, okay? So let's not start grabbing fingers, individual fingers. It is legal to grab all 4 fingers. That is legal, okay? But you cannot grab 1, 2, or 3 digits like so. It is permissible to grab all 4. But what I'm going to recommend to you is you grab the knuckle line here. Okay, you can do so with your thumb if you have big hands, or if you're like me with small, weak hands, you want to come in and lock just like so. When he goes to straighten out, keep the hand close to the chest. The further out here, the more he can rotate his elbow and get away. Oh, you're getting pretty weak there, Placido. From here, again, extension means rotation, and eventually he'll get out. I keep it close up here. No rotation. And as a result, we can hold and control. Okay? So once again, don't grab the wrist. Not much good. Don't grab illegally in ways that will annoy your friends and get you disqualified in competition. Okay? It is permissible to grab the whole knuckle line. Nothing wrong with that. If you have smaller, weaker hands and you have a very large opponent, you might grab without the thumb. I recommend in general, suck it back to the rib cage. Don't keep it out here. Suck it back. When he goes to extend out now, it's very, very difficult indeed. I'm not going to say it's impossible. There's always going to be that guy that gets out. But you will make him work a hell of a lot harder than you are working. Okay, and that's ultimately the ideal. Okay, so with that in mind, let's look now at controlling the wrist. We've got the opponent in turtle position. You got 2 choices. You can go far side, you can go near side. Okay, the advantage is against a tight turtle position, tight. The advantage of this is that we can always take our hand and go through like a knife and get to our training partner's wrist, okay? If I take the wrist, let's be aware there's a danger of wrist rolling where my opponent can hit a Makikomi. So it's important that I keep my body over this side of the body, my head low. So he goes Makikomi, it's difficult, okay? I can't be naive and have my head up here somewhere and get rolled through, okay? So if we are going to use the wrist, let's not be naive, guys. We've got to get into a situation where we go through on a training partner with secure and everything comes over to the opposite side. It's going to make it hard for him to makikomi now. Okay, even risky. As he goes for the makikomi here, he's actually creating a risk for himself, or he can be off balance. Okay. If we're really worried, maybe this guy's literally twice your size and he's known for his makikomi roll, I'm going to recommend you go near side. Okay, there's no makikomi out of this. Okay, he goes to extend his arm. Very, very difficult. Now, please understand, guys, if you go near side, there's nothing that says you can't switch your body to the other side. And we often do this off wrist control. We come in on a training partner, I go through and I take near side wrist. Then I switch my body across the other side. He goes back turtle position, we go in, we take near side wrist and we switch across to the other side. Okay? And in this way, we can use the wrist as a great way to get on the attack against dangerous opponents, even when they have a strong makikomi roll, and penetrate through to a target which might be impossible because of, a target which is easier to employ than traditional seat belts or tight waists on a strongly defensive opponent. Let me rephrase that more clearly so you know exactly what I'm trying to say here. Guys in a turtle position, if he's in a very strong defensive turtle position, very closed turtle position, it might be very hard for me to get a seat belt. He hand fights, makes it hell for me. Okay, I try to get a tight waist, he's fighting my hands at the waist, making it hell for me. But one thing I can almost always do is penetrate to a wrist, because the space only has to be as wide as my fingers. It's like a knife, okay? A knife penetrates through material so much easier than, say, a crowbar, okay? It's just thinner and slicier, so to speak, okay? And my hand will slice through the smallest gap to come through and get to the grips that we want. And he goes to move around from here. You've got that wrist control. And from here, excellent control of your opponent to go on the attack, okay? So those are our 3 attacks, guys. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Those are our 3 targets of attack when we first go up on a turtle position. Understand what the problem is here. Turtle position is a pretty strong position for our opponent, okay? Maybe not as strong as guard position, but it's not bad, okay? People dismiss turtle position, it's a useless position. It's actually a pretty good position to work from. It's defensively very strong and there's some offensive possibilities there. So we've got to be able to attack pretty quickly. A skilled turtle player in bottom position can be quite a pretty significant problem to have to attack. So we need to identify quickly our targets. And the 3 targets are, you guessed it, the hips, the head, and the wrists. The wrists have the advantage that because the hands can be made very narrow, like the edge of a knife, they can fit through small crevices that the wrists and the elbows can't. And so when you can't get to the waist and you can't get to your seatbelt, we often use the wrists. Understand your opponent has 2 wrists, far side, near side. If the advantage of the wrists is that you can get in there very easily on a resisting opponent, the disadvantage is that it does offer the ability for your opponent to take your exposed wrist and makikomi you. So that's the main thing you have to have in mind as you go to use this method. That's why often we go near side and then switch our body to the far side and vice versa. Used in this way, the wrists can be a highly effective part of your attack sequences from turtle position. The big theme of this video on turtle breakdowns is that there's 2 bottom positions in jiu-jitsu. There's guard position, the glamour position, and there's turtle position, which is the non-glamour position. But it's important to understand the higher you go in the sport of jiu-jitsu, the more you will be expected to attack turtle position as well as guard position. Okay, so guard position, we have to pass our opponent's guard. In the case of turtle position, we have to break our opponent down and try to get hooks in. Interestingly, when we go to attack turtle position, the potential rewards are greater and they're generally easier to get to. When you go to pass a tough opponent's guard, even if you succeed, it's 3 points. And it's some of the hardest work in all of jiu-jitsu. Okay, you go up against a world champion who spent his entire life inverting and pommeling his legs. It might take you a long, long time and a lot of physical effort to finally break through his guard. You might go through a whole match and not even get close. It's hard work to pass at championship level. In comparison, if you start in a turtle position, it's I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's a lot easier to simply get 2 hooks in. Okay, if you try to measure degree of physical output and degree of difficulty between passing a world champion's guard and just slipping 2 hooks in against turtle position, it's demonstrably easier that getting hooks in it's demonstrably true that it's easier just to get the 2 hooks in. There's a lot less effort involved. And the rewards are greater. You get 4 points instead of 3. So there's a sense here in which if we're going to go to attack bottom position, you want to be attacking the turtle position. It's the easier option and it gets you more points. So we've got to be strong at this, guys. This is the part of our game that we should be very, very strong at. And with my students, you see, we put a very, very heavy emphasis upon this in training. And as a result, if you even show a whisper of a back to one of my students, they will quickly exploit it, get those hooks in, get the maximum score, and then usually finish with a good stranglehold from the back. So our intention in this video is to get you very strong, very quickly at securing those hooks against the turtle position. Now, with that in mind, there's a question here. You got 2 legs. That means you got to get 2 hooks in. And a natural question for you all to be asking is, which hook goes in first? You got 2 legs, so you got 2 options. Which one do I throw in first? The general answer in the sport of jiu-jitsu is that we typically, not always, but typically put in the near side hook first, okay? There's a bunch of reasons for this, and they're good reasons. Now, please understand, this is a general rule. It is not a hard and fast rule. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's wrong to put in the far side hook. I've seen plenty of people throw in a far side hook over the years in critical situations and world championship level and get the win using that method, okay? But it does come with a certain amount of risk. If you know what the risks are, you can mitigate them and you can overcome them. But you should be aware of what the risks are. If you're in doubt, and maybe you're a beginner starting off in the sport and you're wondering, okay, what should be my modus operandi? I would tend to favor going with the near side hook first in almost every case. Okay, it's a generally safer and generally easier method of getting your hooks in than going far side. There's less that can go wrong. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's wrong to put in the far hook, but I am going to encourage you in the vast majority of cases, go near side hook first. Okay, so first, what does this mean? What's a near side hook? What's a far side hook? Explain yourself. So, facing this way, turtle position. In any turtle position situation, 99 times out of 100, I am going to be slightly on one side of my opponent's body rather than another. And in some cases, I will be entirely on one side of my opponent's body rather than another. It's very, very rare that we are directly behind our opponent and we're located on our opponent's center line. Most of the time, we have a bias towards one side. So you can clearly see that in this case, I'm located over Placido's right hip and I'm slightly out to Placido's right-hand side. Okay? Here, I have switched to the other side. I am now located over Placido's left hip and I'm slightly out towards Placido's left-hand side. Even in the case of horse rights, I am not directly behind my opponent. I am in a diagonal line and you can clearly see that I'm slightly on Placido's left-hand side. If I switch stances, you can see that I am now located on Placido's, most of me is located on Placido's right-hand side. In some of our stances that we work with, you will be entirely on one side of your opponent. Or even more extreme, completely on one side of your opponent's body. Okay? So there's a sense then in which your hips, the center of your mass, must always be slightly on one side of your opponent's body. This means that when it's time to put in a hook, I have a near side and a far side. Here, the near side is Placido's right-hand side. That's the side I'm closest to. And his left side is the far side. That's the side of his body that I'm furthest from. Okay? You have a choice now between throwing in the far side hook or the near side hook. Okay? So I could, under these circumstances, throw in a far side hook. Okay? Or I could throw in the near side hook. Okay? And a natural question for you guys to be asking is,
Is one better than the other? As you probably guessed from the spiel I gave you a few minutes ago, I and most of the jiu-jitsu world generally favor near side hooks for reasons that I will very soon outline. Okay, you can succeed with throwing in a far side hook, but I want to show you why there is a general bias in jiu-jitsu away from this. Facing in this direction, Placido. This direction. Okay. If I throw in a far side hook on my opponent, I'm not going to say it can't work, but it can badly backfire against you, just in terms of center of gravity. Okay, if I work like so, and from this position, I throw in a far hook over my training partner. If Placido rapidly goes into a tripod position, I now am precariously balanced over him. As he starts reaching and grabbing for my head, he can pull me out of this position and directly into a pin. Okay, even if it doesn't end up as bad as that, where he controls my head, he can just shake me off, and you can go from a top position behind your opponent to bottom position right in front of him. Okay, so if I throw a far side hook in here and he just quickly explodes up, you end up back in neutral bottom position. That's kind of sad because you were actually in a very good attacking position just a second ago, and now you got to start all over again from the bottom. Okay, so throwing in that far hook can work. Okay, there are times when it's actually a desirable thing to do. I'll look at that soon, but please be aware that it comes at a price. And that price is your center of gravity goes high over your opponent and you are only supported on the far side. So only one side of your opponent's body is held. You don't control both sides of the body, which is the ideal of back control. And as a result, quick explosive movements on the part of your opponent can have very damaging effects. And you can go from winning positions to neutral positions very, very quickly. Okay, so that's why in jiu-jitsu there is a general bias against far side. Okay, now let's contrast that with near side entries. Now we'll face this way. When we go near side, whether we go with a foot or whether we go with a knee, okay, this gives us a very tight connection to our opponent's body, and that connection enables us to control both sides of the body. When I go in near side on this side like so, I can go through and capture the wrist. Now, when my opponent goes to, say for example, stand up and move away, you're always going to be able to get the hook in. And I control the far side of the body. So when he goes to explode up to his feet, etc., you'll always be able to stay connected to your opponent because you have both sides of your opponent's body control. Now, I know what you're thinking. You say, wait a minute, couldn't I have done the same thing with far side hooks? Couldn't I have gone near side wrist and then thrown over and you would have had the same situation? Yes. These are the exceptions to the rule. If the basis behind this rule is, the underlying basis is you've got to control both sides of your opponent's body. If you want to control the back, you've got to control both sides. What I can't have is situations where one side of the body is being controlled. Here I have a near side hook, but I've made the mistake of going near wrist as well. So only Placido's right hand side is being controlled. So even though I have near side hook, if Placido explodes up, I'm going to fall off just as I would with a far side hook. Okay? The real crime here that's being committed isn't that it's near side or far side, it's that only one side of the body is being controlled. That's the real crime. Okay? So you can fail with a near side hook just as you can with a far side hook. But with respect to the old masters of the sport, they were right insofar as in most cases, it's easier to control both sides of the body with a near side hook than a far side hook. Okay, so the old received wisdom is correct, but maybe not for the reasons that people thought. Okay, it's not that near side or far side hook is better. What is important, the deep underlying lesson, is you've got to control both sides of the body to control the back. Okay, and the best way for most people to do this under combat conditions is to get the near side hook in first and get to the opposite side of the upper body. So if we've got a turtle position like so, and I get near side hook, and I get, say for example, a seatbelt on my training partner. Okay, when he goes to get up from situations like so, you're always going to be able to go through and get that near side hook. And because I have a seatbelt, I also have control of the far side of the body through the armpit. My seatbelt's locked in place.
Okay, and as a result, it's going to be very easy for me to throw the second hook in and get to the back control we want, where my opponent is between my knees, and we have both upper body and lower body control. Okay, so that's the deep underlying lesson. In the majority of cases, you're going to find it easier to control both sides of the human body with a near side hook than you will with a far side hook. Okay, so to summarize all this stuff that we've just thrown at you, the bottom line is you got to control both sides of the body. Okay, no exceptions. In most cases, it's going to be easier for you to do this by getting near side hook in first and far side hook in second. There will be some exceptions to this, okay? But that's the best general advice I can give you with regards to the decision that you have to make. Should I get my near hook in first, or should I get my far hook in first? Most people find it generally easier to get the knee to go in rather than the foot. I'll explain what I mean by this. Turtle position. Okay, if my opponent closes up the turtle position, it requires extraordinary flexibility to get the foot in on the near side. And there's a lot of separation between my body and his body. So that realistically, a plus here just moved away from me and said, put me back very easily. The best ways for us to enter are to get close to our opponent and to penetrate not with a foot, but with a knee. Okay? And when I penetrate with the knee under these circumstances, the near side hook goes in much easier, and we're controlling the far side of the body with a seatbelt. And as a result, we can quickly go in and secure the back. This is the best way for most people to operate. Okay? So with regards with penetrating the near side, we generally penetrate with the knee, which most people find significantly easier than penetrating the foot. When we go far side entry, we almost always penetrate with the foot first, okay? We step our foot in rather than the knee, okay? And that creates a situation where you need a little more flexibility than you would to penetrate with the knee, okay? So most people physically find it easier to attack near side with a knee than to attack far side with a foot. That's another reason why generally Jiu-Jitsu has favored near side entries with regards to the hooks. So you've got two choices. Are you going to go near side? Are you going to go far side? My advice to you is favor the near side, especially favoring entering with the knee, but understand that the deeper lesson here is you must control both sides of the human body and keep them between your knees. Okay? That's the important lesson here with regards getting near side or far side hook in first.